Section 26 of the Best Short Stories of 1917. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Rel. The Path of Glory by Mary Brecht Pulver. Part 1. The Path of Glory by Mary Brecht Pulver, from the Saturday Evening Post. It was so poor a place, a bitten-off morsel, at the beyond end of nowhere, that when a February gale came driving down out of a steel sky and shut up the little lane road and covered the house with snow, a passer-by might have mistaken it all, peeping through its icy fleece, for just a huddle of the brown boulders so common to the country thereabouts. And even when there was no snow it was as bad, worse, almost, Luke thought, when everything else went brave and young with new greenery, when the alders were laced with the yellow haze of leaf-bud, and the brooks got out of prison again, and arbutus and violet and buttercup went through the rotation of bloom up in the rock pastures and maple bush, the farm buildings seemed only the bleaker and barer. That forlorn, unpainted little house, with its sagging blinds! It squatted there through the year like a one-eyed beggar without a friend, lost in its venerable white-beard winters, or contemplating an untidy welter of rusty farm machinery through the summers. When Luke brought his one scraggy little cow up the lane, he always turned away his head. The place made him think of the old man who let the birds build nests in his whiskers. He preferred, instead, to look at the glories of Bald Mountain, or one of the other hills. There was nothing wrong with the backdrop and the home stage set. It was only home itself that hurt one's feelings. There was no cheer inside, either. The sagging old floors, though scrubbed and spotless, were uncarpeted, the furniture meagre. A pine table, a few old chairs, a shabby scratched settle covered by a thin horse blanket as innocent of nap as a Mexican hairless. These for essentials, and for embellishment a shadeless glass lamp on the table, about 6 candle power, where you might make shift to read the bi-weekly, times when there was enough money to have a bi-weekly, if you were so minded, and window shelves full of corn and tomato cans, still wearing their horticultural labels, where scrawny one-legged geraniums and yellowing coleus and begonia contrived an existence of sorts. And then, of course, the mantelpiece with the black-edged funeral notice and shiny coffin plate, relics of Grandpa Peel's taking off, and the pink mug with the purple pansy and, Woodstock, N.Y., on it, the photograph of a forgotten cousin in Iowa, with long antenna-shaped mustaches, the Bible with the little china knobs on the corners, and the pile of medicine testimonials and seed catalogues. All these contributed something. If it was not a beautiful place within, it was, also, not even a pleasant place spiritually. What with the open door into his father's room, whence you could hear the thin frettings made by the man who had lain these 10 years with chronic rheumatism, and the untuneful whistlings of Whittling Tom, the big brother, the shapely supple giant whose mind had never grown since the fall from the barn room where he was 8 years old, and the acrid complaints of the tall, gaunt mother, stepping about getting their inadequate supper, in her gray wrapper, with the ugly little blue shawl pinned round her shoulders. It was as bad a place as you might find in a year's journeying for anyone to keep bright and, chirk up, in. Not that anyone in particular expected, them poor Hayneses, to keep bright or, chirk up, As far back as he could remember, Luke had realized that the hand of God was laid on his family, dragging his bad leg up the hill pastures after the cow, day in and day out. He had evolved a sort of patient philosophy about it. It was just inevitable, like a lot of things known in that rock-ribbed and fatalistic region, as immutably decreed by heaven as foreordination and the damnation of unbaptized babes. The Hayneses had just, quote, got it hard, unquote. Yet there were times, now he was come to a gangly 14, when Luke's philosophy threatened to fail him. It wasn't fair. So it wasn't. They weren't bad folks. They'd done nothing wicked. His mother worked like a dog. Quote, no fair for her, unquote, any way you looked at it. There were times when the boy drank in bitterly every detail of the miserable place he called home and knew the depths of an utter despair. If there was only some way to better it all! But there was no chance. His father had been a failure at everything he touched in early life, and now he was a hopeless invalid. Tom was an idiot, or almost, and himself a cripple. And Nat! Well, Nat, quote, wa'n't willin', unquote. Not that one should blame him. Times like these, a lump like a roc's egg would rise in the boy's throat. He had to spit, and spit hard, to conquer it. If we hadn't the gosh awfulest lot, he would gulp. Today, as he came up the lane, June was in the land. She'd done her best to be kind to the farm. All the old heterogeneous rose bushes in the wood yard and front, quote, lawn, unquote, were pied with fragrant bloom. Usually Luke would have lingered to sniff it all, but he saw only one thing now with a sudden skipping at his heart. An automobile standing beside the front porch. It was not the type of car to cause cardiac disturbance in a connoisseur. It was, in fact, of an early vintage, high-set, chunky, brassily aesthetic, and given to asthmatic choking on occasion. But Luke did not know this. He knew only that it smelled luxury beyond all dreams. It belonged, in short, to his Uncle Clem Cheeseman, the rich butcher who lived in the village 12 miles away, and its presence here signaled the fact that Uncle Clem and Aunt Molly had come to pay one of their detestable quarterly visits to their poorer relations. They had come while he was out, and Ma was in there now, bearing it all alone. Luke limped into the house hastily. He was not mistaken. There was a company air in the room, a stiff, hostile, polite taint in the atmosphere. 3 visitors sat in the kitchen, and a large hamper, its contents partly disgorged, stood on the table. Luke knew that it contained gifts, the hateful, merciful, nauseating charity of the better off. Aunt Molly was speaking as he entered, a large, high-colored, powder-pigeon-chested woman, with a great many rings with bright stones, and a nodding pink plume in her hat. She was holding up a bifurcated crimson garment, and greeted Luke absently. 3 pair of them underdrawers, Delia, and not a break in one of 'em. I says, as soon as I see Clem layin' 'em beside the spring, them things'll be just right for Delia's Jerry, layin' there with the rheumatiz. They may come a little loose, but, of course, you can't be choicy. I've been at Clem 4 or 5 years to buy him union suits, but he's always been so stuck on red flannin'. But now he's got 2 automobiles, countin' the new delivery. I guess he's got to be more Tony. So he made out to spare 'em. And now that hat, Delia, it ain't a mite worn out, and for all you'll need one, it's plenty good enough. I only had it 2 years, and I guess folks won't remember. And what if they do? They all know you get my things. Same way with that colorette. It's a little moth-eaten, but it won't matter for you. The gray suit you can easy cut down for Luke. There. She droned on, the other woman making dry, automatic sounds of assent. She looked cool, Ma, Luke thought, but she wasn't. Not by a darn sight. There was a spot of pink in each cheek, and she stared hard every little bit at Grandpa Peel's funeral plate on the mantel. Luke knew what she was thinking of. Poor Ma! She was burning in a fire of her own lighting. She had brought it all on herself, on the whole of them. Years ago she had been just like Aunt Molly, the daughters of a prosperous village carpenter. They had shared beads, bow, and bangles until Ma, in a moment's madness, had chucked it all away to marry poor Pa. Now she had made her bed. She must lie in it, must sit and say, quote, thank you, unquote, for Aunt Molly's leavings. precious scrap she dared not refuse. Ma, who had a pride as fierce and keen as any. It was devilish. Oh, it was kind of Aunt Molly to give. It was the taking that came so bitter hard. And then they weren't genteel about their giving. There was always that air of superiority, that conscious patronage, as now, when Uncle Clem, breaking off his conversation with the invalid in the next room about the price of mutton on the hoof and the chances of the Democrats' getting in again, stopped fiddling with his thick-plated watch-chain and grinned across at Big Tom to fling his undeviating flower of wit. "Running all to beef, hain't you, Tom, boy? Come on down to the market, and we'll get some A1 sirloins outen you, anyway. Do your folks that much good." It was things like this that made Luke want to burn, poison, or shoot Uncle Clem. He was not a bad man, Uncle Clem, a thick, sandy chunk of a fellow, given to bright neckties and a jocosity that took no account of feelings, shaped a little like a log. He was, back of his head and back of his neck, all of a width, little lively green eyes and bristling red mustaches, a complexion a society bud might have envied. Why was it a butcher got so pink and white and sleek? Pork, that's what Uncle Clem resembled, Luke thought. A nice, smooth, pale-fleshed pig, ready to be skinned. His turn next. When crops and politics failed, and the joke at poor Tom always giggled inordinately at it, too, had come off, there was sure to be the one about himself and the lame duck next. To divert himself of bored expectation, Luke turned to stare at his cousin, Snorta. Snorta, sitting quietly in a chair across the room, was seldom known to be emotional. Indeed, there were times when Luke wondered whether she had not died in her chair. One had that feeling about Snorta. So motionless was she, so uncompromising of glance. She was very prosperous-looking, as become the heiress to the Cheeseman meat business, a fat little girl of 12, dressed with a profusion of ruffles, glass pearls, gilt buckles, and thick tawny curls that might have come straight from the sausage hook in her papa's shop. Snorta had been consecrated early in life to the unusual. Even her name was not ordinary. Her romantic mother, immersed in the prenatal period in the hair-lifting adventures of one Senorita Carmina, could think of no lovelier appellation when her darling came than the first portion of that slew-eyed and restless lady's title, which she conceived to be baptismal, and in due course she had conferred it, together with her own pronunciation, on her child. A bold man stopping in at Uncle Clem's market, as Luke knew, had once tried to pronounce and expound the cognomen in a very different fashion, but he had been hustled unceremoniously from the place, and Snorta remained in undisturbed possession of her honors. Now Luke was recalled from his contemplation by his uncle's voice again. A lull had fallen, and out of it broke the question Luke always dreaded. "Nat, now," said Uncle Clem, leaning forward, his thick fingers clutching his fat knees. "You ain't had any news of him since quite a while ago, have you?" The wit that was so preponderant a feature of Uncle Clem's nature bubbled to the surface. "Dunno, but he's landed in jail a spell back and can't get out again." The lively little eyes twinkled appreciatively. Nobody answered. It set Ma's mouth in a thin, hard line. You wouldn't get a rise out of old Ma with such tactics. Ma, who believed in Nat, soul and body. Into Luke's mind flashed suddenly a formless half-prayer. "Don't let 'em nag her now. Make 'em talk other things." The Lord, in the guise of Aunt Molly, answered him. For once, Nat and Nat's character and failings did not hold her. She drew a deep breath and voiced something that claimed her interest. "Well, Delia, I see you wasn't out at the Bisbee's funeral, though I don't suppose anyone really expected you, knowing how things goes with you. Time was, when you was a girl, you counted in as big as any and travelled with the best. But now She paused delicately and coughed politely with an appreciative glance round the poor room. "They ain't anyone hereabouts but talking about it. My land, it was swell. I couldn't ask no better for my own. 14 cabs, and the hearse sent over from Rockville. All pale gray, with mottled gray horses. It was what I call tasty. Mattie wasn't what you'd call well off, not as lucky as some I could mention, but she certainly went off grand. The whole Methodist choir was out, with 3 numbers in broken time, and her cousin's brother-in-law from out west, some kind of bishop, to preach. Honest, it was one of the grandest sermons I ever heard. Wasn't it, Clem?" Uncle Clem cleared his throat thoughtfully.
"Humiliating, that's what I'd call it. A strong moral sermon all round. A man couldn't hear it thought being humiliated more ways than one."
He was back at the watch chain again. "It's a pity it couldn't have gone, Delia. You and Mattie always was so intimate, too. You certainly missed a grand treat, I can tell you, though if you hadn't the right clothes—" "Well, I haven't." Ma spoke dryly. "I don't go nowheres, as you know, not even church." "I s'pose not. Time was it was different, though, Delia. Ain't nobody but talks how bad off you are. And Chester said she seen you in town a while back and wouldn't have known it was you if it hadn't have been you was wearing my old brown cape, and she recognized it. Her and me got 'em both alike to the same store in Rockville. You was so changed, she said she couldn't hardly believe it was you at all." "Sometimes I wonder myself if it is," said Ma grimly. "Well, so I was saying, it was a grand funeral, none better. They even had engraved invites, over 100 printed, and they have folks from all over the state. They give Clem here the contract for the supper meat."
"The best of everything,"
Uncle Clem broke in.
"None of your cheap graft. Give me a free hand. Jim Bisbee told me himself. I want the best you got, he says, and I give it. Spring lamb and prime ribs, fancy hotel style."
"And M. Carson baked the cakes for 'em, 16 of 'em, and Dickinson, the undertaker's telling all over they got the best quality shroud he carries. Well, you'll find it all in the bi-weekly, under Death's busy sickle. Jim Bisbee sure set a store by Mattie once that she was dead. It was a grand affair, Delia. Not but what we had some good ones in our time, too." It was Aunt Molly's turn to stare pridefully at the peel plate on the chimney shelf. "A thing like that sets a family up, sorta." Uncle Clem had taken out a fat black cigar with a red, white, and blue band. He bit off the end and alternately thrust it between his lips or felt of its thickness with a fondling thumb and finger. Luke, watching, felt a sudden compassion for the cigar. It looked so harried. "I always say," Aunt Molly droned on, "a person shows up what he really is at the last, what him and his family stands for. It's what kind of a funeral you've got that counts, who comes out and all, and that was true with Mattie. That wasn't a soul worth naming that wasn't out to hers." How Aunt Molly could gouge, even amicably! And funerals! What a subject! Even in a countryside where a funeral is a social event and the manner of its furniture marks a definite social status. Would they never go? But it seemed at last they would. Incredibly, somehow, they were taking their leave. Aunt Molly kissing Ma good-bye, with the usual remark about, quote, hoping that things would help some, unquote, and about being, quote, glad to spare something from my great plenty, unquote. She and Senorita were presently packed into the car, and Tom had gone out to goggle at Uncle Clem cranking up, the cold cigar still between his lips. Now they were off, choking and snorting their way out of the wood yard and down the lane. Aunt Molly's pink feather streamed into the breeze like a pennon of triumph. Ma was standing by the stove, a queer look in her eyes, so queer that Luke didn't speak at once. He limped over to finger the spilled treasures on the table. "Gee, look it, Ma! More of them prunes we liked so, and a bag of early peaches, and fresh soup meat for a week." A queer trembling had seized his mother. She was so white he was frightened. "Did you sense what it meant, Luke? What Aunt Molly told us about Mattie Bisbee? We was left out deliberate, that's what it meant. Her and me that was raised together and went to school and picnics all our girlhood together. Never could see one, thought the other, when we was growing up. Jim Bisbee knew that too. But," her voice wavered miserably, "I didn't get no invite to her funeral. I don't count no more, Lukey. None of us, anywheres. We're just them poor, God-forsaken Hayneses." She slipped down suddenly into a chair and covered her face, her thin shoulders shaking. Luke went and touched her awkwardly. Times he would have liked to put his arms round Ma, now more than ever, but he didn't dare. "Don't take on, Ma, don't." "Who's taking on?" She lifted a fierce, sallow, tear-wet face. "Hadn't no use making a fuss. All's left to work and die after a while." "I hate 'em, Uncle Clem and her, I mean." "They mean kindness, their way." But her tears started afresh. "I hate 'em." Luke's voice grew shriller. I'd like, oh, damn 'em." "Don't swear, boy." It was Tom who broke in on them. "It's a letter for rural-free delivery. He just dropped it." He came up, grinning, with the missive. The mother's fingers closed on it nervously. "From Nat, maybe. He ain't wrote in months." But it wasn't from Nat. It was a bill for a last payment on the, quote, new harrow, unquote, bought 3 years before. Dua. One of the earliest memories Luke could recall was the big blurred impression of Nat's face bending over his crib of an evening. At first flat, indefinite, remote as the moon, it grew with time to be more human, intimate proportions. It became the face of, quote, brother, unquote, the black-haired, blue-eyed, big boy who rollicked on the floor with or danced him on his knee to "This is the way the lady rides, tritty-trot, trot, tritty-trot, trot," or who, returning from school and meeting his faltering feet in the lane, would toss him up on his shoulder and canter him home with mad, merry scamperings. Not that school and Nat ever had much in common. Even as a little shaver, Luke had realized that. Nat was the family wilding, the migratory bird that yearned for other climes. There were the times when he sulked long days by the fire, and the springs and autumns when he played an unending round of hooky. There were the days when he was sent home from school in disgrace, when protesting notes, and sometimes even teacher, arrived. "It's not that Nat's a bad boy, Mrs. Haynes," he remembered one teacher saying, "but he's so active, so full of restless animal spirits. How are we ever going to tame him?" Ma didn't know the answer, that was sure. She loved Nat best. Luke had guessed it long ago, by the tone of her voice when she spoke to him, by the touch of her hand on his head, or the size of his apple turnover. So much bigger than the others's. Ma must have built heavily on her hopes of Nat those days. Her one perfect child. She was so proud of him. In the face of all ominous prediction, she would fling her head high. "My Nat's a peel," she would say. "Can't never tell he'll turn out." The farmers thereabouts thought they could tell her. Nat was into one scrape after another, nothing especially wicked, but a compound of the bubbling mischief in a too ardent life. Robbed orchards, broken windows, practical jokes, Halloween jinks, vagrant whimsies of an active imagination. It was just that Nat's quarters were too small for him, chiefly. Even he realized this presently. Luke would never forget the sloppy March morning when Nat went away. He was wakened by a flare of candle in the room he shared with his brothers. Tom, the 12-year-old, lay sound asleep, but Nat, the big man of 15, was up, dressed, bending over something he was writing on a paper at the bureau. There was a fat little bundle beside him, done up in a blue and white bandana. Day was still far off. The window showed black, There was the sound of a thaw running off the eaves. The whitewashed wall was painted with grotesque leaping shadows by the candle flame. At the first murmur, Nat had come and put his arms about him. "Don't you holler, little 'un. Don't you do it. 'Tain't nothing. Only Natty's going away a spell. Quite a spell, little 'un. Now kiss Natty. That's right. And you lay still there and don't holler. And listen here, too. Natty's going to bring you something. A grand red ball, maybe, if you're good. You wait and see." But Natty hadn't brought the ball. 2 years had passed without a scrap of news of him, and then he was back, slipped into the village on a freighter at dusk one evening. A forlorn scarecrow Nat was, so tattered of garment, so smeared of coal dust, you scarcely knew him, so full of strange sophistications, too, and new trails of thought, so oddly rich of experience. He gave them his story. The tale of an exigent life in a great city, a piecework life made of such flotsam labors as he could pick up, of spells of loafing, of odd, incredible associates, of months tagging a circus, picking up a task here and there, of long journeyings through the country, quote, riding the bumpers, unquote, even of alms asked at back doors. "Oh, not a tramp, Nat?" The hurt had quivered all through Ma, but Nat only laughed. "Jiminy Christmas, it was great." He had thrown back his head, laughing. That was Nat all through, sipping of life generously, no matter in what form. He stayed just 3 weeks. He had spent them chiefly defeating Ma's plans to keep him. Wanderlust kept him longer the next time. That was 8 years ago. Since then he had been back home 3 times. Never so poor and shabby as at first. Indeed, Nat's wanderings had prospered more or less, but still remote, somewhat mysterious, touched by new habits of life, new ways of speech. The countryside, remembering the manner of his first return, shook its head darkly. A tramp, a burglar even, God knew what. When, on his 3rd visit home, he brought an air of extreme opulence, plenty of money, and a sartorial perfection undreamed of locally. The heads wagged even harder. A gambler, probably, a ne'er-do-well, certainly, and one to break his mother's heart in the end. But none of this was true, as Luke knew. It was just that Nat hated farming, that he liked to rove and take a floater's fortune. He had a taste for the mechanical and followed incomprehensible quests. San Francisco had known him, the big races at Cincinnati, the hangars of Mineola. He was restless, Nat, but he was respectable. No one could look into his merry blue eyes and not know it. If his labors were uncertain and sporadic, and his address that of a nomad, it all sufficed, at least for himself. If at times Luke felt a stirring doubt that Nat was not acquitting himself of his family duty, he quenched it fiercely. Nat was different. He was born free. You could tell it in his talk, in his way of thinking. He was like an eagle and hated to be bound by earthly ties. He cared for them all in his own way. Times when he was back he helped Ma all he could. If he brought money he gave of it freely. If he had none, just the look of his eye or the ready jest on his lip helped. Upstairs in a drawer of the old pine bureau lay some of Nat's discarded clothing. Incredible garments to Luke. The lame boy, going to them sometimes, fingered them, pondering, reconstructing for himself the fabric of Nat's adventures, his life. The ice-cream pants of a bygone day, the pointed, shriveled yellow Oxfords, the silk front shirt, the old cufflink or stud, they were like a genie in a bottle. These poor clothes! You rubbed them, and a whole Arabian Nights dream unfurled from them. And Nat lived it all! But people, dull, stodgy people, like Uncle Clem and Aunt Molly, and old Beckenridge down at the store, and a dozen others, these criticized him for not, quote, working regular, unquote, and giving a full account of himself. Luke, thinking of all this, would flush with impotent anger. Oh, let him talk, though. He'll show 'em some day. They don't know Nat. He'll do something big for us all some day. Tribus. Midsummer came to trim the old farm with the wreaths. It was the time Luke loved best of all, the long, sweet, loam-scented evenings with Ma and Tom on the old porch, and sometimes, when there was no fog, Pa's cot, wheeled out in the stillness. But Ma was not herself this summer. Something had fretted and eaten into her heart like an acid ever since Aunt Molly's visit and the news of Mattie Bisbee's funeral. When, one by one, the early summer festivities of the neighborhood had slipped by, with no inclusion of the Hayneses, she had fallen to brooding deeply, to feeling more bitterly than ever the ignominy and wretchedness of their position. Luke tried to comfort her, to point out that this summer was like any other, that they, never had mattered much to folks, but Ma continued to brood, to allude vaguely and insistently to, the straw that broke the camel's back, It was bitter hard to have Ma like that. Home was bad enough, anyway. Sometimes on clear, soft nights, when the moon came out all splendid and the, peepers, sang so plaintively in the hollow, the boy's heart would fill and grow enormous in his chest with the intolerable sadness he felt. Then Ma's mood lifted, pierced by a ray of heavenly sunlight, for Nat came home. Luke saw him first, heard him, rather, for Nat came up the lane. Oh, miraculous! Driving a motor car. It was not a car like Uncle Clem's, not even a step-brother to it. It was low and almost noiseless, and shaped like one of those queer torpedoes they were fighting with across the water. It was colored a soft dust gray and trimmed with nickel, and, huge and powerful though it was, it swung to a mere touch of Nat's hand. Nat stood before them, clad in black leather Norfolk and visored cap and leggings. "Look like a fancy brand of chauffeur, don't I?" He laughed, with the easy resumption of a long-broken relation that was so characteristically Nat. But Nat was not a chauffeur, something much bigger and grander. The news he brought them on top of it all took their breaths away. Nat was a special demonstrator, out on a brand-new high-class job for a house handling a special line of high-priced goods, and he was to go to Europe in another week. Did they get it straight? Europe! Jiminy! He and another fellow were taking cars over to France and England. No, they didn't quite get it. They could not grasp its significance, but clung humbly, instead, to the mere glorious fact of his presence. He stayed 2 days and a night, and summer was never lovelier. Ma was like a girl, and there was such a killing of pullets, and extravagance with new-laid eggs as they had never known before. At the last he gave them all presents. "Tell the truth," he laughed, "I'm stony broke. 'Tisn't mine, all this stuff you see. I got some kale in advance, not much, but enough to swing me. But of course the outfit's the company's. But I'll tell you one thing, I'm going to bring some long green home with me, you can bet. And when I do," Nat had given Ma a prodigious nudge in the ribs, "when I do, I ain't gonna stay a bachelor forever. Did you get that?" Ma's smile had faded for a moment, but the presents were fine. A new knife for Tom, a book for Luke, and 20 whole round dollars for Ma, enough to pay that old grocery bill down at Breckenridge's and Pa's new invoice for patent medicine. They all stood on the porch and watched him as far they could see, and Ma's black mood didn't return for a whole week. Evenings now they had something different to talk about, journeys in seagoing craft, foreign countries and the progress of the "European" war, and Nat's likelihood, he had laughed at this, of touching even its fringe. They worked it all up from the boilerplate war news in the bi-weekly, and Luke's school geography. Yes, for a little space the blackness was lifted. Then came the August morning when Pa died. This was an unexpected and unsettling contingency. One doesn't look for a "Chronix's" doing anything so unscheduled and foreign to routine. But Pa spoiled all precedent. They found him that morning with his heart quite still, and Luke knew they stood in the presence of imminent tragedy. It's all very well to peck along, hand-to-mouth fashion. You can manage a living of sorts. and farm produce, even scanty, unskillfully contrived, and the charity of relatives, and the patience of tradesmen, will see you through. But a funeral, that's different. Undertaker, that means money. Was it possible that the sordid epic of their lives must be capped by the crowning insult, the poor master in the pauper's field? If only poor Pa could have waited a little before he claimed the spotlight, until prices fell a little, or Nat got back with that, quote, long green, unquote. Ma swallowed her bitter pill. She went to see Uncle Clem and ask, and Uncle Clem was kind. He'll buy a casket, he's willing for that, and send a wreath and pay for notices, and even half on a burying lot, but he said he couldn't do no more. The high cost has hit him too, and where are we to get the rest? He said, at the last, it might be better all round for us to take what Ellick Flick would gimme out'n the poor fund. Ma hadn't been able to go on for a spell. A pauper's funeral for Pa. Surely Ma would manage better than that. She tried to find a better way that very night. This farm's mortgaged to the neck, but I calculate Ben Travis won't care if I'm a mind to put Pa in the south field. It ain't no mortal good for anything else, anyhow, and he can lay there if we want. It's a real pleasant place, and I can get the preacher myself. I'll give him the rest of the broilers, and they's seasoned hickory planking in the lean-to. Tom, you come along with me. All night Luke had lain and listened to the sound of Big Tom's saw and hammer. Tom was real handy if you told him how, and Ma would be showing him just how to shape it all out. Each hammer blow struck deep at the boy's heart. Ma lined the homemade box herself with soft old quilts, and washed and dressed her dead herself in his faded, outlawed wedding clothes. And on a morning soft and sweet, with a hint of rain in the air, they rode down in the farm wagon to the south field together, Pa and Ma and Luke, with Big Tom walking beside the aged, knobby horse's head. Abel Gasm, a neighbor, had seen to the grave, and in due course the little cavalcade reached the appointed spot inside the snake fence, a quiet place in a corner, under a gray-beard elm. As Ma had said, it was, quote, a pleasant place for Pa to lay in, unquote. There were some old neighbors out in their own rigs, and Uncle Clement brought his family up in his car with a proper wreath, and Reverend Kearns came up and, declining all lien on the broilers, read the burial service, and spoke a little about poor Pa. But it wasn't a funeral, no how. No supper, no condolence, no viewing, quote, the remains, unquote, not even a handshake. Ma didn't even look at her old friends, riding back home between Tom and Luke, with her head fiercely high in the air. A dull depression settled on Luke's heart. It was all up with the Hayneses now. They had saved Pa from charity with their homemade burial. But what had it availed? They might as well have gone the whole figure. Everybody knew. There wasn't any comeback for a thing like this. They were just nobodies, the social pariahs of the district. End of section 26.